Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome along to the Crash MotoGP podcast. On the show today is Dorna finally going to get the American showbiz treatment. Toprak is still angling for a MotoGP seat for next year, and a rider injury update. And I look forward to all things Kota and MotoGP, as MotoGP, I should say, heads to America for round 3, aren't we, of the championship. Remember, if you want to send us a question, you can voice note us or just send it in the written form. Email is podcast@crash.net, along with your name and where you're from. If you're voice noting it, please keep it to 30 seconds and we should get you on the show. Somebody did send us a video message, which I love the creative thinking. I can't actually use that though. The technology prevents me. So voice note, let's stick with that. Thanks, though. We really like the message. Remember, voice note, 30 seconds. The recording date is 11th of April. It's a Tuesday. My name is Harry Benjamin. Joining me as ever is Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Hewin. Big news, I suppose, a few days ago, just before, well, in the UK at least, we've had a bit of a long bank holiday weekend, haven't we? But MotoGP, Keith, it was rumoured and now confirmed, have hired an American, a new chief commercial officer, Dan Rossomondo, I think is how you say it, from the NBA, the basketball league in America. He's going to head up media rights and global commercial partnerships and digital business teams. But I'm thinking, is this Dorna reaching out? They want the American showbiz treatment, a bit like F1 did with Liberty Media coming in.
Or is it just a case of trying to get someone else on the board without the Espeleta name?
Or that.
Some might say. But I've got to say that Dorna do make some fairly good decisions when it comes to their management, despite the fact that they get duffed up when it comes to the fact that they seem to employ quite a lot of their own family or relatives. I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast quite a lot, haven't we? The fact is that we seem to have lost our way compared with Formula One, and I can't believe I'm saying that, when it comes to digital marketing, digital media, and the younger franchise. I think that we definitely need to keep that going. Now, in Europe, we've got it fairly well covered. If you go to European races, there's these youngsters coming through the fence, you know, quite literally sometimes, coming through the turnstiles to come and watch MotoGP and are engaged with it. But I think in places like the UK, it's a very old demographic. It's not a modern-day demographic. I mean, we knew that for the weekend, Harry. We both went to the BSB round at Silverstone. And you actually look around you, and they're older than you, maybe a bit younger than me, but not by much in many cases. You know, there's work to be done, and this guy hopefully will have that American kind of a view on things. Now, worst case scenario for me, I mean, I know that we need these kind of influencers and people that you know have got millions of followings on Tick, Face, Snap, whatever it might be. I am joking.
Yeah.
But the point being, all of these social media platforms, all of these social media platforms need attending to, because that is where youngsters, I mean, I've got, you know, girls still at home here and they're on them all the time. It's the communication medium that all of the, you know, the sub 30-year-olds are using. And those are the guys that we need to come through. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. You know, we will have no British Grand Prix crowd if we don't start getting the youngsters through the door for a very good reason. It's a conversation I hope to have later on today with you know, Stuart Pringle, actually, at Silverstone. You know, I've got a call booked with him later today just to discuss where that's all going, because I didn't know the quality of the bands that they had on at Silverstone last year at the end of the MotoGP day. And I live nearby, and I think that we've got a fairly large, you know, conurbation of people in Milton Keynes and in Northampton, two of the biggest towns near the circuit. And if my lack of knowledge regarding who the bands were, you just wonder whether these big conurbations had no clue as well. Well, if that's the case, we've missed a trick. Need to make sure that these youngsters are engaged, and even if they're coming just to watch the bands afterwards, that's a good thing. You know, if they're coming to the Grand Prix predominantly to watch the bands, but then suddenly they go, bloody hell, MotoGP's really good. And I think the difference between MotoGP and Formula One is, and you can shoot me down with this, and anybody that's a big Formula One fan and goes to Formula One regularly can shoot me down on the Crash site. It appears to me that you go outside of the fan base of the actual sport itself. There is a large group of people that go there to be seen at Formula One. I don't think we have that in MotoGP. I don't think it's the the hot place to be seen for selfies and so on and so forth. Whereas in Formula One, there's a fairly large proportion of the fans that go are there for the event, to be seen at a big, massive named event, and maybe bump into some of these influencing type people. I mean, we talked about it before we came on here, I couldn't remember her name, the three-horsewoman that Brundle bumped into on the grid one day and hadn't got a clue who the hell she was, and neither would I have. But of course, there were millions of youngsters that knew exactly who this woman was. Being a youngster, you can enlighten us in a moment. But the point being is that we need to get a sustainable situation going in MotoGP in markets like the UK, where we don't have that progression coming through. You know, as much as we want the older fans, because they've got big money to spend, which is a good thing, you wonder when that runs out. When do they get too old? When do they stop going to MotoGP? And where's the backup? Maybe this American guy coming through will have some kind of a view on that, hopefully, and it will start bringing up the tail end, if you like, in some of the marketplaces where we've lost the youth.
Megan the Stallion is the rapper.
Is that her name?
Coming to a MotoGP race soon. Close enough. Stallion, you're there, kind of there. It is an interesting one though, Pete, isn't it? Because I mean, Keith is kind of bang on. There is a lot more to be seen on a Formula One grid, but I suppose those people, more often than not, are very famous people, or they're being brought in because of their fame. They're actors, they're rappers, they're whatever. But then you also have this new generation, of influencers as well that are trying to appeal to the audience that Formula One, that motorsport, I suppose, wants to reach, thanks to this, we talk about it all the time, the Netflix effect. But I think that's actually having a wider effect across motorsport as well. Now people think and look at Formula One and see other motorsports and go, oh, it's actually kind of cool, I want to be involved in this. Maybe that would only be a good thing for MotoGP, because from the way I see it, MotoGP is so underutilized at the moment in terms of what it can be for entertainment. Keith talking there about the Silverstone music event afterwards. There could be a whole generation of people who go primarily for the music and see the MotoGP as a sideshow, but that's a way of getting into it. So maybe this hiring, there's going to be, I think, an official press conference on Friday sort of introducing him properly, but I mean, it's probably going to take a while for him to actually do anything, I imagine.
It's certainly a key hiring, isn't it? A key position. I guess you'd put it about three on from the top of the Dorna tree, I suppose. You'd have Carmelo at the top, and then Carlos, his son, and then Chief Operating Officer or Chief Commercial Officer, I think is the official title, isn't it? So this is a big key position, and as you say, bringing in somebody from outside, and this, coming from another sport, a fresh set of eyes. It's going to be interesting to see how they see MotoGP. Coming from basketball, which is, so the things Keith was saying, it's all about, well, not all about, but a lot of it is about the show and building up heroes almost, isn't it? And you think of the big basketball stars that, even though it's not a massive sport in the UK, we all know their names, don't we? The Michael Jordans or the whoever else is, because they were able to build them up and make them bigger than their own niche sport in a way. And I think in that way, it's quite a nice fit. And it'll be interesting to see if he can do, you were speaking about what the goals are. I think is to build the profile, the audience, and the revenue of MotoGP. That's the three targets that's been set here. So, and Keith was talking about some of the ways you might do that, things like the profile and things like that. You're looking at social media, but then you've got the audience side, but then, as Keith also mentions, it's the audience you can break down into so many different parts, can you? The age groups of the audience and all those kind of things, where MotoGP traditionally was quite a young, 20 years ago, was quite a young audience compared to Formula One. Now they've all sort of grown up together and gone through MotoGP together, and we haven't got the influx coming in at the younger end, it seems. And so maybe this is where, a fresh set of eyes can really change things and move things right. And interesting, just lastly, that it's at COTA, isn't it? Which is really where we see this big contrast with Formula One in terms of that massive F1 crowd. Was it 400,000 weekend crowd, I think, at COTA? This is where people really realise the effect of the Netflix series and everything else, just how big, after all those years of F1 really struggling to make an impact, didn't they, in America? Suddenly it's huge. I mean, those pictures of those grandstands, it was like looking at the old pictures of the Indy 500, wasn't it? Where you see the grandstands full. I mean, if MotoGP can get near that, that will be fantastic. But, MotoGP is popular just in other parts of the world. So, it's trying to make it a real global series, I suppose.
America's a funny old market, though, isn't it? I mean, you tend to find that Americans feed off success. They feed off of that. What am I looking for? The winners. It's all about winning in America, isn't it? And I mean, once they get behind a sport like that, they're behind it 100%. I mean, at the moment, MotoGP just isn't really cutting the mustard. I mean, you know, Kota is quite lucky that well, I say lucky, that's not true. You make your own luck in these promotion type situations. But Kota was looking like it was going to fail as a circuit, looking like it was going to go into what we would call receivership at one point. It didn't have enough money to even spend on the amount of staff it needed at one MotoGP round, I seem to remember, going back into the past. So Formula One being successful has really rescued it. A bit like Silverstone to a great extent. You know, Silverstone needed F1 to be as successful as it is, to just keep going. At one point, it looked like it might not. And I think I did an interview with Stuart Pringle, the managing director at Silverstone, as is at the moment, last year, that he alluded to the fact that, you know, it could have gone under had it, you know, the pandemic and all the other factors that were forcing against it. Although I think they made more money out of the pandemic, to be honest, because it had guaranteed money that came in from different promoters to actually run the sport, even though you didn't have a crowd there. So it's been difficult times for these tracks. And Formula One, to be honest, as much as I, again, reluctant to say it, has probably been the saviour of these two tracks in particular, Silverstone and Kota. But it's got to move on. I think the key with Dorna has been Manel Arroyo, who was, you know, very, very big mover within the, you know, I think he might have been the third man down, Peter, that you mentioned earlier. And this guy, although doesn't directly replace what Manel Arroyo used to do, he's got a broader brief. And it all depends on how much autonomy he's given within the tight-knit Espeleta Dorna setup. I can see some massive changes coming in within MotoGP over the next few years. International Race Teams Association, as much as we love, respect, and almost revere Mike Trimby and his setup at IRTA, the International Race Teams Association, that is going to change in the next few years. I think Mike won't mind me saying that, but at some stage, it's got to, just through age and so on. The FIM, Jerez, and some of the FIM people are beginning to try and muscle their way back into being a bigger force within our sport. You know, Jerez has just, I mean, he's the FIM president, and he, at the moment, he's best known for always ended up in a camera shot somewhere, but he's moving behind the scenes to position the FIM in a better place overall with the sport. Dorna, you know, when does Carmelo Espeleta let go of the reins, and Carlos and you know, some of these new guys that they're obviously positioning themselves with, when do they take over? There's a sea change coming within our sport. I can see it within the next 2-3 years. And that will make a big difference. I think that Formula One was boring. The racing drivers weren't allowed to use their own social media, weren't allowed to put anything out from the side of the track, weren't allowed to do this. Well, to be honest, MotoGP have been a bit like that. I mean, the fact they've only just registered the digital marketing, digital platforms like Crash should be allowed in, you know, free of charge. You guys don't have to pay anymore to come in to do your job, which it might seem strange to people listening to this, that digital platforms like Crash had to pay to get passes, to get a position in the media room, which to us seems ridiculous in this modern age. This is the way things are going. And slowly but surely, I think that the Dorna have gone, hang on a second, we've missed a bit of a trick here. Look at F1, look what they've done. And within 2 or 3 years, F1 have turned it right round. Younger audience. It's exploded in just about every marketplace. And I think it's caught MotoGP a bit by surprise. MotoGP, in my view, is better racing, and I won't say a better sport, because I think that the technical innovation that you get in Formula One is exceptional. So therefore, that kind of prototype racing I always have massive respect for, and the people working within it, I wouldn't want to disrespect any of them. But I think on the actual, from a racing spectacle, MotoGP is ahead of Formula One. So I think there was a lot of headroom. There's a lot of headroom for Dorna and MotoGP to do better than they are, and this guy might be the start of that.
I would agree for that. I always gauge it off of, can you predict the racing or not? And in F1, you absolutely can predict who's probably going to be on the podium.
Our predictions were that way up.
Exactly. MotoGP, there's all this talk about, it's Ducati, it's the Ducati Run series, but at the moment, whether that may be, they may all be Ducati bikes, but you have no idea which rider is actually going to be on the podium. Well, so far we haven't. So I agree with you. Actually, I think the racing, more often than not, is the greatest spectacle. But I mean, MotoGP, I believe, has come a long way as well. It has followed F1, but not to its extreme extent. You know, F1 came from a period where, you know, under Bernie Ecclestone, where I think even drivers couldn't film anything from the pit lane and post it on Twitter. I think Lewis Hamilton did back in the day and got told off, said, no, you can't post that. Bernie said, no, don't do it. And you think, well, and now you go, are you mad? That's great insight. You know, and now left, right and centre, there were people going live on Instagram and all this kind of thing. So
we have the same problem with geo-blocking. You know, geo-blocking just drives me crazy. You know, like, so something that's come out in the UK can't be seen in America and vice versa and stuff like that. I mean, it's a rights thing and it's a contractual thing. So there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that means that you can't do that in some circumstances. But they need to tidy all of that up. You know, if it's a promotion for the sport, if it's something that's pushing the sport forward, then that needs to change. I think it will. I think that you know, this is the big area that Dorna now have to attack to get us back on track. The rules and the way that they've got the three classes, Moto3, Moto2, and MotoGP, and we've seen a shift there as well, haven't we? We've seen a shift, really, I think, it's almost gone unheralded, in as much as that Moto3 and Moto2 have been pulled back a little bit in their kind of promotion, if you like, in as much as that you don't see so much of them, you don't hear so much of them. They're not even in warm-up on a Sunday morning, you know, on a race day morning, you're not seeing them out on track. I wonder whether that's deliberate in some way to get a bigger gap, to have MotoGP as definitely the pinnacle, and therefore pulling back Moto3 and Moto2, which have been heralded as sometimes the better races, particularly Moto3, than MotoGP. You know, that's not what you want to really hear. You know, it's a bit like saying that British touring cars is a better race than a Formula One race. You don't want to hear that too often. You need to...
Well, F3 is arguably more entertaining than Formula One can be on a regular basis.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And none of us see that, because Formula 3, who watches Formula 3 at the end of the day? So I think that the powers that be have sort of pulled that back. And I wonder whether we're seeing a little bit of that at the moment in 2023, whether that'll continue.
That is kind of the mystery to me, if you like, in a way. And I appreciate I don't understand it because I'm too close to it, if you like. But it's, you know, MotoGP is such an amazing show relative to Formula One when the racing starts, that you just think, how is this other sport so much bigger? But of course, cars will always be, you know, people are much more familiar with them on a worldwide scale, aren't they? But, you know, and then you also have all the factors that Keith mentioned of building the event around more than just the racing. And maybe that's been perhaps the mistake, if that's the word, in the past, is that MotoGP has relied so much on the track action and not on the parts that you build around that.
Is one of the problems, and I bring this up because I don't know who asked it, but there were a few comments and questions, is that, you know, there's also talk of MotoGP is a global sport, but it needs to be more and more global. But the fact is, you know, a lot of the riders tend to be, you know, Spanish, Italian, you know, a couple of French. There isn't really a huge global rider market on the grid. Is that an issue?
I don't know. I think Spanish speakers are quite prolific around the world.
But anyone outside, there's no Brazilians, there's no Argentinians, there's no, you know,
Chinese,
Americans, British.
Well, I think that Dorna have been quite proactive in trying to promote different markets. I mean, certainly they've had their hand in the British market for a long time. They've been pushing and shoving and funding various British riders over the years. And I can only guess that they're probably doing the same elsewhere as well. You've only got to look at the Southeast Asian situation. You know, you wouldn't have found a Thai in the lineup, you know, a few years ago. You know, Asia Pacific region is big. The Japanese riders, obviously, you know, we don't have a Chinese rider in there at the moment, but I'm sure we will have in the coming future. I think that there are seeds in different marketplaces to try and make that work, and it is a thing. And half the problem, I suppose, we have to some extent. I mean, I was again watching BSB and seeing, I don't know how many bikes there were in that F900 BMW class thing. It's a new class of BSB at the weekend that we watched, Harry. And there was something like, you know, I don't know how many bikes. There must have been 36 bikes on the grid at one point. And it was magnificent. You know, it's like, it reminded me of the old days when the grid was full. You know, are 22 bikes enough on the grid is a question I asked, I think, in the last podcast. I don't believe so. I think that we need more motorcycles on the grid, which will give us more opportunity to bring in other people. I mean, you know, it just happens that the Spanish have been behind their racing for a long time. They've got world-class racetracks there that are, you know, license to run Grand Prix. We've only got, well, 1.5 at the moment. We've got Silverstone and Donington, maybe, if they do a bit of tidying up there. And that's it. You know, we've got great racetracks in this country, but they're not homologated to run Grand Prix because they're not yet up to, well, they won't ever be up to the safety standard of the Grand Prix because, you know, geographically they're too close to a hedge or a boundary somewhere. So we're in a situation where we don't have quite the tracks. The Italians got some great tracks over there, obviously, and they run a load of, you know, pocket rocket racing for youngsters. There's a real infrastructure coming through. The academy, the VR46 Academy. Closest thing I suppose the Americans have got to that is Colin Edwards boot camp. I mean, it used to be the Kenny Roberts boot camp, to be honest. He used to run something just outside Catalunya racetrack. He had a big plot of land there that they would run all sorts of things going on there. So there have been seeds of this before. Funding at the end of the day comes down to, you know, it's bringing these people on through funding. Again, in the same interview that I did with Stuart Pringle last year, it was one of those situations where I asked him about his new kart track that he's got at that Silverstone are building and how much they were leaning towards, you know, mini motos for motorcycles. It's all very well catering for the car people, but what about youngsters who want to be involved in mini moto? You know, and I said to him at the time, are you doing enough to bring on the youngsters in motorcycle racing? Seeing as you are a MotoGP track and you do run a MotoGP, and I was surprised at his thoughtful answer, something along the lines of, and I'm not quoting directly, but he sort of looked at me and he went, now you put it like that, we perhaps aren't doing enough. And I was surprised at that thought-provoking, you know, the fact that it hadn't really occurred. I know that Formula One is at the top of the thought process at Silverstone, but it needs a few more people like Dorna, like this new guy, to be into the likes of Stuart Pringle and the people that are organising, you know, the biggest event in our calendar, if you like, in Britain. Sorry for saying that to World Superbikes and VSB, but the MotoGP should be the pinnacle of two-wheeled sport in this country because it is Grand Prix. Kind of. I mean, I think Silverstone has got they get a lot of stick for the cost of tickets and stuff like that. Silverstone is the most expensive motor race track in Britain. It costs more money because they have more staff, bigger area, massive overheads to run that event. Now, the motorcycle racing public are perhaps demographically not as perhaps rich as the Formula One crowd. Perhaps, I don't know. You know, Formula One, what do they pay? 400 quid a ticket or something for the weekend?
Yeah, that's just for a Thursday.
Well, if that's the case, you're never ever going to compete with that in motorcycle racing. It just does not have that kind of.
Can I just say, is it not? Because I spoke to the CEO of COTA, Bobby Epstein, a few weeks ago, and so I put this to you: it's not the job of the circuits to promote the sport, right? The sport should sell the tickets themselves. It's the circuit's job to make sure that they can entertain the crowds outside of the racing on the track, because the circuit has no control in terms of the actual racing. They just got to make sure that the other bits, the crowd is in and everybody's having a good time. So surely there's only so much that a circuit like COTA, like Silverstone can do. It ultimately comes down to the championship.
Very, very good, Ari. I like that. I think what it does is it just kind of balances up the argument. Who is responsible for the promotion of the event in that locality? Now, I would say that's a 50-50 deal, personally, but that's just my opinion from a mediocre business person in this area. Don't forget, I live in Northamptonshire, so I think the promoters are hand in hand with the circuit to try and move that forward. Everyone has a vested interest in it. I mean, it's a situation where Dorna obviously have got the sport to where it is from a spectacle point of view, but maybe, and that's again why we've got this new COO, is they have a weak spot. They have a blind spot that they're now trying to work on. You know, I've got a massive respect for Dorna, the way that they've done things. I think that the way they brought our sport on from a few years ago when we were on, bloody one, we had the two-tier MotoGP class, didn't we? The proper bikes, and then we had the punters' bikes effectively. I mean, I hated that, but there was no other way around it at that time to get a grid full of people. And Dorna managed that into a position where we are now. You know, close racing is because of the regulations, the way that they've manipulated the regulations to where we are, you know, from a technical point of view. But from a promotion point of view, I think the circuit has a fair size responsibility because they know their area. You know, hang on a second. I want to do something in my back garden. Am I going to invite people from 200 miles away, or am I going to try and get everybody within 5 miles into my garden? I'm going to get everybody here. And the point I made earlier on about I wasn't aware of the live acts that they were having at the end of each day at Silverstone. Now, I should have been, really. I mean, that's as much down to my fault. I'm in the industry, so I ought to know what's going on. But I didn't. And I asked around after the event, you know that El Herrera was on? You know, did you know that this one was on, that one was on? And everybody said no. Well, that really is down to the locality. Now, you know, we have local radio stations, we have local events going on. I believe that tracks like Silverstone should say, okay, if you've got an NHS pass, if you are an NHS worker, which they all have their passes, just the same as we do to go to track, that gets you in for free, you know, on a Saturday. You know, you need to en masse collect great big chunks of people. You know, police, if you've got a police pass, come on in. You know, it's for free. You can come and you can bring your kids under 12 years old or whatever it might be. You know, Boy Scouts or whatever they are nowadays. There's probably some reason you can't say boy on the front of it. But anyway, you know, all of those kind of situations, masses of people. Silverstone is a place that has huge areas and it looks terrible when it's empty. You need to fill the place up. If the sun's shining and the terraces are full and you can give those passes away, yeah, I can understand where you might want to cream off the top for the grandstands. Okay, so you're going to have to pay extra to go in the grandstands and stuff like that because they cost a lot of money to put up as temporary structures. But I think that there are opportunities that I don't see people using to make it work to a wider audience. You know, they did do you remember, Harry, you'll be across this, I don't know whether you might even be a bit too young for this, but the Formula Renault series in this country, Renault sponsored Silverstone, open doors. Anybody could come. You could, through your Renault dealership or wherever. You had to get the passes from somewhere. You couldn't just turn up and walk in. There was a big Renault promotion type thing for Formula Renault. And they were absolutely rammed. The place was full, you know, because of this big promotion. Now, that was a risk, but of course, someone the size of Renault could afford to sort of fund it, I would imagine. But on a lesser scale, you could do the same thing with MotoGP, you know, Friday and Saturday, free to pass holders from the police, from the NHS, from whatever else you might think that is a worthy group of people. A, it looks good politically, and B, it gets more people in the gate that wouldn't necessarily go until they were encouraged to, until they saw what we actually do, what a great event a MotoGP event is.
Yeah, I did a much smaller scale, but a Ferrari Challenge race last year at Silverstone. They did the exact same thing. They gave a load of free passes to police officers, I believe it was, and people who were part of a charity as well, just because they wanted to give back, but also it got people through the gates, and and it was a free day. And obviously there's a bit of Ferrari racing, but there was loads of Ferraris that people could go and see and have a little close-up look at, and lots of other stuff you could do outside. So it was just a nice sort of family kind of atmosphere and event. And then there was a bit of racing on as well that you could enjoy too. So, but arguably they're smaller scale.
Well, I think the other thing that MotoGP is missing is that access. I think you and I said earlier on, we were both at the BSB round, the British Superbike round at the weekend at Silverstone, and it was hugely amusing for me watching you fearing that every gate we walked through, someone was going to grab hold of you and shout at you. But of course, at BSB, which is probably from my perspective, BSB do the most for the fans. British Superbikes, You have access. And how relaxed was it? Because they were allowed to go wherever they wanted, there was no tension. Everybody was just chilled and enjoying their day and wandering around in the paddock and so on. Now, I appreciate that in MotoGP, obviously it's a slightly more technical, secretive, cutting edge type environment. So the security there is slightly higher than perhaps It's going to be a World Superbike and British Superbike. But all the same, I still feel that MotoGP can do more for on-site fans who have paid the biggest amount of money to go to any bike meeting. And I think that's an area that could be cleared up a fair bit as well. How is it you go to Misano and the paddock is absolutely rammed full of people? I mean, how do the Italians get so many people behind the scenes when at the British Grand Prix it's like bloody you've got everything except watchtowers keeping you out?
There's some pretty big Italian riders, and there have been in the past, so maybe that's
well.
Why.
Then, true, but the fact of the matter is how do they get the passes to get in there? I mean, we kind of all wander through Misano or Mugello or any of those places, and you go, how the bloody hell did these all get the passes?
Yeah, friends and family.
And yet at the British Grand Prix, people, the paddock is quite sterile in comparison, and it's a bigger paddock.
Well, and that's the other thing. To the Moto2.
That's the other thing. We all go to the wing this year. I wonder how that's going to work. We're all behind the wiggly roofed wing instead of the international straight. So we've got a different starting place and there's a new hotel the other side of the track now, and they've got a walkway over and the like. But from my experience, there's not enough room behind the wing to facilitate Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP and all the infrastructure that you need, as in support vehicles and the like, behind the wing. I know they're going to use the Stowe circuit as a parking space as well, but that ain't very big either, and it's a bit piecemeal if you ask me. So I wonder whether
I think they'll put Moto 2 and 3 in the national.
Yeah, you see, I hate that.
But it's exactly what they do for F1.
Well, that's my point earlier. Are we having a purpose split between Moto 3, Moto 2, and MotoGP? Are we getting to that elite type situation that's coming from MotoGP?
I think you have to.
Do you have
Personally, I think you do. Like as the bloody Formula 3 commentator, obviously I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, the pinnacle is the top.
There is a distinct difference between MotoGP fans and Formula 1 fans. I think that MotoGP motorcycle fans will find that very hard to swallow, because Moto3 and Moto2 are an integral part of the entire show and give us some great racing. And unlike Formula 3 and the like, you get one or two riders that move on up through the next categories to their top class. In bike racing, you get great guys come through from Moto3 to MotoGP. Jack Miller's a great example. He left the Moto2 category to go straight through the MotoGP. So I hope that they don't miss the DNA of motorcycle racing, if you like. I think that would go against the grain to the greater public, the greater bike racing public. We'll see.
Well, look, we could talk about this, I think, for about 2+ hours, really. It's such an interesting topic conversation. What do you think? We'd love to know your thoughts. Do you agree with us? Do you agree with Keith, me, Pete? Is the American dream coming for MotoGP? Let us know your thoughts. But we've got some other things to get through before our time is up. And there's some testing taking place at the moment, Pete, isn't there? Courtesy of Toprak and Yamaha, the man who sits second currently in World Superbikes, on the M1, private two-day test, or this is the second of 2 days, isn't it, in Jerez, or Jerez, however you want to say it.
That's right, Harry. Yes, it's a private test, so it's one of these behind closed doors, no official lap times. There are some other riders out on track as well. I think Folger's going to be out there, who of course is a substitute rider this weekend, and I think Pedrosa for KTM, maybe Bradl as well for Honda. But yes, I mean, what you say, actions speak louder than words, I guess, isn't it? As you say, second test on a Yamaha M1. Now, that clearly shows that there's intent, should we say, from both sides here. That Toprak is still interested in MotoGP, and Yamaha are still interested in Toprak. And I think Lynn Jarvis, is going to be there this time. So he's going to go down there, be present at this test again. The top guy at Yamaha Motor Racing before he flies out to COTA. So yeah, this really shows that they are taking this seriously, and because it's been a bit sort of mixed messages, isn't it, from Toprak? It's been a bit kind of like, well, maybe, but I'm happy in Superbike, and I think this shows that he is definitely still interested, and Yamaha for sure. If you're putting on private tests, Cal's going to be there as well, the perfect mentor, of course, having made this same move before from Superbike to MotoGP. He's there again. I spoke to him at Aragon at the Grand Prix last year about Toprak, because they tested at Aragon previously. That was where they tested. And, Cal said, yeah, he was riding it like a superbike. And he said, you would. I mean, it was his first time on a MotoGP. But he said he's a clever guy, and he was learning every single run. He was getting quicker and quicker. And Cal did say it was quite amusing that Toprak didn't like the engine braking. I said, well, the rear wheel's 6 foot in the air. So, it won't work very well then, will it? But yeah, so this is 2 days on track at Jerez. I think it's a track that the Toprak likes, and there are other MotoGP bikes on track. So yeah, I mean, it's a step closer, isn't it? We know that Morbidelli's contract is up. That is the only factory team seat that's available for next year. All the others are on 2-year deals. So clearly that's the ride he's looking for. Okay, there's talk about a satellite Yamaha team, but Kenan Sofuoglu, Toprak's manager, has made clear, isn't he? And you believe Kenan when he speaks. He's not a guy who says something that he doesn't mean. That if Toprak goes, it's for a factory team. So you've got to believe that's what they're looking at. That's what they're considering. And let's see what they decide.
Kenan Sofuoglu, you banged it on the head there with that one, because he's always been absolutely pro-factory. But why is it I always get the feeling that Yamaha are behind the game? Always a little bit too little, too late with Yamaha. I don't understand their thinking sometimes. I don't know whether it's a budget restriction, it's a boardroom restriction, or whatever it might be. Lynn Jarvis, he's been there for a long time, talking about needing changes in management. Maybe there needed to be some changes done there previously to try and move things on a little bit. But Yamaha just seem to have been a little bit behind the game for a long time now. They got lucky with Quartararo, perhaps. Moto2 rider that came good in MotoGP to the shock of everybody, I think, even then, back in the day. But the way things are nowadays, you've got to be proactive with that. The cross-the-frame 4-cylinder motorcycle, that actually probably will suit Toprak. I mean, that will be, rather than having to change the style to suit some of the other V4s and the like, maybe that mid-corner speed will be right up his alley, riding as a world superbike rider. But you're right in that, it feels like there's been a slight loss of interest. I think Toprak's having trouble as it is at the moment in the world superbike, frame. It's not working for him at this moment in time. Everybody's made a bit of a step. So suddenly, perhaps he's got a little frustrated, and that translates into the way you ride and translates into the performance that you're coming from. This stuff is it's almost like mythical. It's frighteningly ghost-like in the way that people ride a motorcycle. What makes that rider just that tiny weeny bit better than the guy next to him? And Toprak had that, and I use the word had because right now it's not as evident as it was before in world superbikes. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. It'll be interesting to see how he manages the situation, how Kenan Sofuoglu, as you say, Pete, his management will advise him in the circumstances. And I would say that having Lynn Jarvis on site is as much to manage Kenan Sofuoglu as it is to watch what Toprak's doing. I think that's more likely. It's a sort of a meeting of the management of minds, if you like, to try and see if they can get to some kind of a deal as much as it is for the guy riding the motorbike. And that's going to be an interesting scenario as we move forward as well, whether those two clash heads. And what you said, Pete, is dead right. Kenan is not a bloke you mess around with. He is headlong in, like banging heads straight away. I mean, people didn't like what he used to say, about Toprak. And Kenan, how many times was he a Supersport world champion? 5, I think it was, wasn't it? Something like that, 4 or 5. So the guy knows what he's on about, both on and off a motorbike. So it'll be interesting to see where that comes. And the Turks have a fairly confident way of dealing as well. Like you've only got to look at the Onchu brothers as well. These guys, there's some fast men coming out of Turkey at the moment. We'll wait and see. But I don't know. Yamaha have got a step to make. I know that the first few rounds of MotoGP traditionally never really give you the full picture of what we're going to get as we get to Europe. I mean, once we get to Jerez, as some of the Italians call it,
Jerez.
Everyone pronounces Jerez in a different way. But once we get there, that really is the turning point on the season for me. That's when we get a real indication about what's going to be happening. Once we get I can't remember who said it now. It's the ground war, isn't it? It's when we get to the ground war. It's when everything starts to really, get stuck in. And we're nearly there. Kota next.
Well,
I'll wait.
COTA next. Well, you say it. Let's look forward to it then, shall we? Before we dive into all things COTA and your little insider's guide, Keith, there's some injury sort of updates, although we are, Pete, a little bit ahead of, we're not quite sure at the time of recording what's going on. And then again, even when the press releases come out, you never know what's actually going to turn up on the weekend. But Miguel Oliveira has obviously been out since after the Portsmouth sprint. He is flying to COTA. Hopes to race, not confirmed. We don't know about Marquez yet. And crucially, that penalty too, got Enea Bastianini hoping to be back in the frame. Paul Espargaro a bit longer for sure. What can you tell us at the moment?
As you said there, Harry, I think to put it briefly, Paul is definitely not going to be at COTA. Folger's going to be there in his place, and the others will try and ride. But as you say, they will have to pass a medical on the Thursday. So,
they're all on the entry list. The entry list came out this morning. I saw it this morning. The only one that's officially being replaced is Pole by Folger. But that medical, mind you, that's always a bit of a joke, isn't it? The medical thing. If you can lift a cup of tea or point in the right direction, then you pass. It's it always strikes me as a slightly strange way of officially checking that these guys are okay. But that's how it's set.
Well, you know what? Oh, sorry, Pete. No, go on.
I was just going to say, so the one unknown is, as you say, Harry, that is the Marquez penalty. We're still in limbo about that, aren't we? Because is he going to have to serve it on Sunday or not? We haven't had the verdict yet. There was two sort of parts.
I think that they're being dead crafty with that, Pete. I think that they're gonna see where his medical facility, where his, because they don't have to do it here. It doesn't have to be COTA. If it's going to be a next round, it could be the next round. And they may not make a decision this time around. They can move it to the following round if they want to. I mean, it's cynical.
But they're still appealing it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's gone to the MotoGP Court of Appeal, which I think the last time that happened was the case of the famous spoon or tyre cooler or swing arm spoiler. And that was it took about 17 days, I think, to issue a verdict on that. Well, if that's repeated, that will be well after the COTA weekend. So, if you're Repsol Honda on Sunday, what do you do? Sunday being the race, do you follow the penalty that you're appealing, which says you must serve it at your next race, or do you assume that you're going to win the penalty or not? I mean, what happens if Marquez does the double long lap and then the Court of Appeal says, "Oh no, you were right. He doesn't need to do that." I mean, what do you do then?
Well,
there's no undo button.
In most judicial situations, once you've got an appeal, that holds everything else. It's all held in abeyance, isn't it? It doesn't go any further at that particular point. So while we're at appeal, he doesn't have to serve a penalty. That's the normal legal process that I understand.
I mean, that would make sense. But I mean, there was two parts to the Repsol Honda appeal, if you like. One of them was to sort of say, look, you can't change the penalty, and the second part was exactly as you say, Keith. So they asked to suspend the penalty. Now, all of that got passed on to the Court of Appeal. So, I mean, I know nothing about anything legal, so I've no idea. But does that mean that, as you say, it's automatically on hold, or does it mean that somebody has to officially sort of, bang the hammer and say, everything is suspended until we make a decision? I don't know. Will we get a decision?
Yeah,
that would make sense. Something comes out.
Do you know what's wrong with that, Pete? You're a great journalist in the MotoGP paddock, and yet you don't know, and I don't know, and Harry doesn't know, and the public don't know. And that's what's wrong with this process. We should know. There should be a release from our headmasters that tells us exactly what the process is. And it's out there for everyone to see, and it's transparent. And that's the bit that cheeses me off sometimes, when our rule book it is a little bit too ambiguous in some respects. And crying out for a definitive on this. And here we are, a few days away from the next Grand Prix, and we don't have a definitive on any of it, which is, unless I've missed something, which I hope I haven't.
I mean, we don't. Yeah, that's it. I don't think we even know the date that they will sit and see the case. I don't think that's been released, published, or.
Well, to add to that, I mean, you talk about not even the fans not knowing. Sanjay has sent in a question regarding penalties and when they are to be served. Like we saw in round 1 at Portimao, Joan Mir received a long lap penalty and had to take it in the main race after the sprint. And Mark has a double long lap to be served at his next appearance. Which race is this to be taken in, the sprint or the feature length? Should penalties from the sprint be served in the next sprint and feature to feature, respectively? It makes no sense. And also, on the back of what you said about wins not counting in the stats, but the points counting and but the points counting, surely the penalties should have a bit more structure too. That's from Sanjay.
Well, Sanjay should be on the board, shouldn't he, really? Because he's bang on dead right. I mean, how can you argue with what he's just said? You can't. And that's my problem, is the clarity isn't there, and it should be there. I mean, this is a premier sport at the end of the day. These things shouldn't be left, to sort out in appeal and so on and so forth. I mean, the fact that they worded it so bloody badly, how can you, the penalty is for the next round, when all they needed to put in brackets that he races at. It was fairly simple, really. And yet, when I'm not a contract, well, I suppose I am a contract man if you think about it back in the day, because we've all had contracts through our racing careers, and we've had to deal with contracts. So you do get a bit of a sixth sense for what's not written in one or what is written in one. But this is a professional sport with professional management, with professional rule makers and lawyers and legal systems. These gaps should never, ever have occurred. This should never, ever have happened. And it kind of throws us open to hang on a minute, are we a pro sport here or what? How did it get to this? It should never have got to this point. It should never have even been an issue. He should have been, if he's riding at Kota or if he's riding at Jerez, whenever his next race is, that's when you serve the penalty. Regarding whether it should be in the sprint race or whether it should be in the main race, of course, if he's copped a penalty, if he's allowed to take it in the sprint race, that basically halves his penalty effectively, because points-wise, he's not. It's a half-point situation. Now, that's only half a penalty for me. A proper penalty is in the main race, and also in the main race, he has an opportunity, because it's double the distance, to make good that penalty. He has double the distance to make up that time that he's been penalised, which is calculated roughly at about 3 seconds per long lap penalty, is about where they try and measure it. So there's a lot of open book at the minute to try and work this through, and I think Sanjay's question is bang on. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I believe, and again, this is where we could do with it really written on every single statement, but that all penalties go into the main race. So, and as you say, Keith, maybe that's the reason why, because if you start doing them in the sprint, it's half the penalty, etc., etc. And then on the wording of the rule, exactly, Keith. I mean, you think once the wording is there and it's signed off, which is what happened on the Sunday at Portimao, wasn't it? It said the penalty will be served in, the Argentinian, actually named the Argentinian Grand Prix. There it is. To then try and change that 2 days later, and also the fact that Honda have appealed this, Japanese teams especially, they don't appeal things by chance. They appeal it if they think they've got a very, very 90% plus chance. I'm just giving a rough idea, but you know what I mean? It's not something that you do, oh, well, let's just try our luck. It's because they believe that they can win this case. And, let's see what happens. But most people, I think, do believe that they will win it, because, as you say, Keith, it's there in black and white. And how do you then 2 days later change something that was fixed?
I think Honda, I don't think Honda should be slammed for this at all. They have been a little bit. They've been trolled terribly in the press and on social media. Honda are only doing what is right to do. You're only a cheat if it's against the rules. If the rules are there and are so loose that you can take advantage of them, that's what you do. And I hold my hand up to Honda. I think, yeah, good on you. If you see that they've written the rules so badly that you can get around them, that is their job. I would hold them more responsible for being, for not challenging this, rather than the fact they have. I know it doesn't go down well with the fans and all the rest of it, and the Marquez thing crops up straight away. Everybody having a go at Marquez, but the fact is, if the rules are written so sloppily, and the sanction was written so sloppily, and there's a great big gap that you can drive a bus through, then drive it through. Honda should not be vilified for basically showing up the rules to be, or the written part of this particular rule to be so poorly written. And if they, I'll use the word, get away with it, well, that's not their fault. They're not just getting away with it. They are working to the letter of the law. It's like anything. It's a technical regulation. How many times did Ducati come up with something that no one else has thought of? And they drive their technical, guru through whatever rule it was, and they come up with something that they get away with again. They're not vilified for that. They're praised for their innovation. Well, the same thing goes for something like this. You know, Honda have seen that their lawyers have told them that they think there's a good case for being able to get away with it. This is a world championship at the end of the day. You know, Marc Marquez with 42 races in an entire season could still win the world championship at the end of the year, and this might make the difference. So if you're Honda, you're going to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that happens.
And just on the getting away with it, Keith, I mean, to go back to you were quite right. Was it 3 seconds per long lap? So, you know, if Mark had done the penalties in Argentina, it would have cost him 6 seconds, let's say half a dozen places, who knows, 7, 8 points. But by missing the race, which he did, you know, he's lost out on potentially 37. Now, I'm not saying he would have won both, but the point being is he hasn't got off scot-free here. The bit that we're all uncomfortable with is that Miguel Oliveira was also out injured, isn't it? That's what makes it a bit more difficult, is that the guy that he took out has also had suffered that same points loss. But if you just look at Mark's situation and go, okay, the penalty given would have resulted in 7 or 8 points lost, 6 seconds added to his time, as you rightfully say, Keith. Instead, he missed the whole event and he threw away 37. You know, he has served a penalty in that sense, but it's just the fact that Oliveira, as the innocent party, has also served it, isn't it? So let's hope that these wordings will be sorted out in future so that it is clear for everybody and that it's either, you know, it's one way or the other. That's what we all want, isn't it? Is that clarity. It's what the riders keep bringing up about the punishments they get, is they want consistency and clarity. Will it be the next race, regardless of if you're injured or not, or is it a specific event? You know, what is it? And they need to stick to it.
The next race syndrome. He could have turned up at Argentina and done 2 laps and rode around the long lap penalty. You know, at the end of the day, if it had been that situation, he could have just turned up in Argentina and done a couple of laps through the long lap penalty, and that's the penalty served with broken wrist. That is assuming he'd passed.
There would have been uproar at that, surely.
Well, that's assuming, of course, he passed the fitness test. Oh. Which
that is
which actually probably means writing his own name, but anyway.
Signing the full disclaimer, yeah. I mean, just finally on this, there was an interesting point by the former FIM president, Ippolito, who was a predecessor, and he sort of, on Twitter, I think he was, and he made the point that these kind of penalties, the long laps and things like that, that they're great if you can serve them in the race where the punishment occurs. You know, then it's okay, you know, you've done something wrong, you get a penalty, you serve it in that race, and it's done and dusted. But they don't really work when you start carrying them over, as we're seeing now, and this is where things get a bit more murky. And I think he had quite a sort of relevant point there. It's something that we haven't thought about. Maybe if you don't serve the punishment in the race, maybe we need a different kind of punishment, not this sort of double long laps, for the reasons that Keith has just outlined. There's potential ways around it.
Why don't we see grid penalties, or do we? And I've just blanked it. Or
we do sometimes, yeah, for things like yellow flags in practice or something like that.
Could that not be a, you know, Mark has to start from the back or start from the pit lane?
Well, we've had that before, and you know, you have ride-throughs. They've actually calibrated it quite well. Now, a long lap, really, the alternative to that in the old days was you had a ride-through penalty, which was like ruined your race. It was like 35 seconds, 40 seconds to go through. So, you know, whereas a long lap penalty takes 3 seconds off and it penalises you accordingly. So I think that there are still those increments, if you like. But again, even with, you know, talking about Argentina, you know, Jack Miller, a whole grid in front of the entire field from a penalty before, and you know, even with that, he still couldn't win the race. So it's kind of like grid penalties for the likes of Marc Marquez are you know, meat and veg, aren't they, for Marc Marquez? He loves cutting his way through.
Well, I mean, we can talk about penalties to the cows come home. Yeah. Why don't we talk about some of the actual on-track action and what we can expect for this weekend, Keith? A return to Kota. We like this track. I mean, historically bumpy, but I think they sort of sorted that out, haven't they, in the last couple of years?
Well, the trouble is they built it on a bog, and the track keeps moving. If you remember back in the day, there was all sorts of contractual problems when they were building this place back in the day, and so there's a bit of movement. They've bladed it, they've cut it. You know, when they bladed it last time, they left all the dust and dirt on it and shot blasted £1 million motorbikes to bits at the front end, and then it was bumpy in places, which it still is. You know, the worst for me, you know, it's bad enough down the main straight, but the worst bumps for me are like turn 3. You come off the top of that hill and come down under the bridge, and there's a dirty, great big, you know, almost a ramp in the middle of the road. Hopefully they got rid of that. It's a very interesting. I like going to Kota. I mean, Austin is a great city to start with. So you are down the road from a very, very vibrant environment. 6th Street through the middle of Austin is a sort of a headline kind of a place, if you like. Loads of bars, loads of clubs, loads of music going on. And then if you want to pull it back to the slightly more backpackerish type place to pop out to, you've got Rainy Street, which again is a long street with sort of in people's front gardens. You've got lots of bars and stuff like that outside various bungalows and so on and so forth, which is quite a cool place to be. Lots of street food and stuff like that. You can walk all over the Austin and find somewhere to go. But of course, you're only one block, if you like, in American terms, away from the reality of America, for me, which is homelessness and people that are on their uppers, which is, I just find that the juncture between those two things. You've got 6th Street, everybody with money blasting away, chucking it at it, necking the beers, eating the steaks, and one street away from that are 1,000 homeless people scrabbling around for $1. Welcome to America. Back to the track, fantastic racetrack to go and view at. Lot of atmosphere there. Again, they put on the odd band as well in that centre where that massive tower is. Paddock is huge. You can wear yourself out walking around there. Lots of sort of connecting buses and the electric this, that and the others to give you a lift if you're feeling a bit lazy or you've got lots of luggage to lump around with. I like the place. It's a completely different, unique environment compared with anywhere else, which is the great thing about MotoGP, effectively, because just about everywhere you go, track-wise, it is unique to another one. But it is the all-American thing. It is the all-American dream. It's quite a long way out of Austin, by the way. It's not a walking distance to the racetrack, let's put it that way. It's not like Le Mans or somewhere like that where you can walk down into the town. So you've got to have a vehicle. You've got to be able to get to there. But, masses of parking area, masses of ways in, usually well staffed, although they did dip a few years ago when I think they were running low on money and they didn't really staff the place as well as they should have done. So parking and so on was a bit more of a bun fight to get out. But generally, really well run, great atmosphere. Not as many people as perhaps you would expect to be there, which is a good thing for some people because you can just wander anywhere, big banking to watch what's going on. But from a track perspective, bumpy, dusty. You've got 5 bottom gear corners, which is typical Formula One type situation. Not everybody's cup of tea. But having said that, there are very physical racetrack from a rider point of view. You've got a lot of changes of direction at quite high speed in some places, which means that you've got a lot of physical work to make the bike go through that massive snake from the top of turn 1 all the way down to getting towards turn 11, the next hairpin. There's a lot of work to be done through there. So from a MotoGP bike, you're working very, very hard indeed, but great to watch it. I enjoy this one. I think it's a good one. The atmosphere there is fantastic.
I can't wait for it. I love a bit of racing around COTA. Now, the crucial question, though, or questions, predictions, I should say. What are we going for? Top 3, please, for Sprint and the Grand Prix, of course. Peter McLaren, I'm going to come to you first. I would like your top 3 placings for the Sprint. For the
please. Sprint, I just think Marquez, he's won 7 times there. He's coming back. All this controversy, the injury, it just wouldn't surprise me if he's there again, especially for a sprint. So even if the bike's not holding on, working perfectly, he'll just make it work somehow. So Marquez, I'll go Bezzecchi second because he's just on that form, and Jack Miller, I'll go for third for the same reason. He can wrestle that KTM around and get it to the flag for the sprint.
Okay, I've gone for Jorge Martin to take the P1 spots, Bagnaia in second, and I've also gone for Miller for third in the sprint. So that's my 3. Mr. Hewen?
Mate, tricky. Sprint.
Tricky.
I'm going to go Bezzecchi, Marquez, Binder, sprint.
Bezzecchi, Marquez?
Yes.
Got to clarify now.
You have. Will this be the weekend that we get a double Marquez on the podium? Will this be the weekend? Could happen.
Well, clearly not in the sprint.
No.
Because you haven't predicted that.
No, I'm not predicting.
Grand Prix, then.
I'm just saying, will it generally be a double Marquez podium somewhere along the line? Okay, on the main race, Bagnaia,
Yeah.
Bezzecchi, Vinales.
Okay, Bezzecchi, Vinales in third. Pete.
Marquez, Bagnaia, Bezzecchi.
Okay, Marquez, Bagnaia, Bezzecchi. Thank you. And I have gone for really rogue. Well, not really rogue. I don't know. Marini, Bezzecchi, Martin as my top three. So the thing is, you actually cannot predict. You can't.
No.
You really can't. And I wouldn't be surprised if all three of us picked up a few points across our podiums.
Well, so I think it's the furthest we've been apart from each other.
It probably is, but I feel like I didn't score any points last time, and I put the big hitters. So, it's a flip of a coin. Let us know who you're going for in the comments below. We'd love to see them. Who's your top three, Sprint and Grand Prix? And we'll come back this time next week and exchange notes, shall we? Thank you very much. In the meantime, we're done for this week's show. COTA is up next. MotoGP returns to America. And then we shall be back same time next week to look back at it all. In the meantime, make sure you tuned in across crash.net for all the latest news and analysis across the week. Get your questions in the comments, as I say. Tweet, Instagram, Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP, or our email is podcast@crash.net. And please do make sure you leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, particularly on Apple and Spotify. And we shall see you right back here next week. Keith Ewan, thank you. Pete McLaren, thank you. I've been Harry Benjamin, thanking me. Bye-bye.